The day we signed the papers on that old house, my husband kissed me on the cheek and told me this was our forever home. He said it with a smile that felt so real I kept that image in my head for months like a photograph. I kept it even after I found the first document, even after I found the second. Even after I sat on the cold floor of that house at 2 in the morning, holding papers that proved the man I loved had been quietly signing my life away to his family before the ink on our mortgage was even dry. They said the house was a fixer-upper, they were right. What none of them counted on was that I am very good at fixing things, including the mess they made of my name, my money, and my future. Before I take you into this story, I want to ask you something, because I still ask myself this question on the hard nights. What hurts more, being betrayed by a stranger or being erased by the person who swore in front of everyone that they would protect you? Stay with me, because by the end of this you will have your answer. And if you have ever loved someone who quietly used that love as a door they could walk through and take everything on the other side, this one is for you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment when you get to the part that makes your jaw drop, because there are several of those coming. My name is Riley, and I want to start by telling you exactly who I was before all of this happened because I think it matters. I was not the kind of person who looked for problems. I was not suspicious by nature. I did not snoop through phones or second-guess kind words or read hidden meanings into small things. I was a woman who believed that if you loved someone fully and honestly and without reservation, that love would be returned the same way. I believed that about marriage. I believed that about family, and for a long time, that belief was the most expensive thing I ever owned. I grew up in a small house with my mother and my grandmother. My father left when I was 4. He did not leave dramatically or with explanation. He simply was there one morning and not there the next, and my mother never really recovered from that. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. My grandmother kept the house warm. I learned early that love was something you earned through loyalty and presence. You showed up, you stayed, you worked. You did not abandon the people who needed you. That was my whole operating system. That was the code I ran on. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was 30. He had an easy laugh and warm eyes and the kind of confidence that made you feel safe standing near him. He came from a big family: his mother Connie, his father Gerald, his older brother Marcus, and his younger sister Diane. They were loud and close and always in each other's business in the way that looks warm from the outside until you are on the inside and realize that the closeness is actually a structure, a power structure. And Connie sat at the top of it. I did not see that at first. I saw a woman who threw big holiday dinners and remembered everyone's birthdays and called her sons every Sunday. I saw a family that loved each other. I wanted to be part of it. I had spent most of my life watching my mother love people quietly and get very little in return, and here was this loud, expressive family that hugged and argued and forgave and showed up. I thought I had found something I had been missing. Daniel proposed after 2 years. It was simple and private and felt exactly right. We married at the end of that summer in a small ceremony. My mother cried. My grandmother held my hand before I walked out and said, "Make sure he sees you, Riley, not the idea of you. Make sure he sees you." I did not fully understand what she meant at the time. I would come to understand it very well. The early years of our marriage were good. I want to be honest about that. There was real warmth between us. We bought a small apartment. I worked as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized construction company. Daniel worked in sales for a commercial real estate firm. We were not rich, but we were steady. We saved carefully. We talked about the future with the kind of easy optimism that happens when nothing is broken yet. The first crack came in year 3. It was small and I almost missed it. Daniel's parents were having some financial trouble. Connie called him one evening while we were eating dinner. I watched his face shift in that way faces shift when someone is about to ask for something and already knows the answer before they ask. He hung up. He told me his parents needed help covering a shortfall, about $4,000. He said he had already told them we could help. He had not asked me. He had told me. I remember sitting with that for a long moment. $4,000 was not nothing for us at that point, and the fact that he had committed our money without even asking me was something I should have named clear. Lie right then. Instead, I nodded. I told myself it was family. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I told myself that Connie and Gerald would not let it become a pattern. I told myself a lot of things in those early years that were not true. We helped. Connie thanked me with a casserole. Gerald shook Daniel's hand. Marcus came by that weekend and helped Daniel fix our kitchen faucet, and everyone laughed and it felt like the right thing had been done. So I let it go. And that is the thing about small surrenders. Each one feels like generosity until you look back and realize you were just teaching people where the door was. The idea of buying a house came up in year 4. It was my idea, actually. I had been watching our rent go up and our savings slowly flatten out, and I wanted something that was ours, something with a yard, something that would grow in value rather than just disappear into someone else's pocket every month. I started researching neighborhoods on my lunch breaks. I made spreadsheets. I tracked mortgage rates. I was excited in the way you only get excited about things that feel like building something real. Daniel was enthusiastic too. He had contacts in real estate. He said he could help us find something that was undervalued, something with good bones that we could improve. He started talking to people in his network, and then one evening he came home and told me he had found something, an old house about 40 minutes outside the city. It had been on the market for a while, it needed work. but it was priced well under market value and it sat on just over an acre of land. His words were, "This is the one, Riley." I drove out to see it on a Saturday morning. It was early October and the trees around the property were doing that thing where they turn every shade of orange and red and gold all at once. The house itself was old, white siding that had gone gray in patches, a porch that needed the boards replaced, windows that were single pane and drafty, but it was solid, the bones were good, and something about standing in the kitchen with the October light coming through the window made me feel like I was supposed to be there. We made an offer, it was accepted. We went through the entire mortgage process together, or so I believed. We signed what felt like hundreds of documents. I trusted Daniel to handle the communication with the real estate attorney because he knew the field and because I was deep in a busy season at my job. I initialed and signed where I was told to sign. I trusted that my husband was looking after us equally. I trusted him the way you trust the person you sleep next to every night without thinking about it, the way you trust someone whose name is next to yours on every piece of paper. We moved in on a cold November Saturday. We used paper plates that first night because the kitchen boxes were not unpacked. We sat on the floor of what would become the living room and ate takeout, and Daniel said, "We built something, Riley." I looked at him in the dim light of that old house and I believed him completely. The problems with Connie started as they often did, slowly. Within 2 months of us moving in, she was coming by the house at least once a week, sometimes more. She always arrived unannounced. She would walk through the rooms with a particular expression on her face, not quite criticism but not quite approval either, somewhere in the neutral territory of a woman who feels she has authority over a space but is choosing not to use it yet. She would open cabinet doors. She would comment on what I was doing with the renovation. She once rearranged the items on the kitchen shelves while I was in the next room, and when I noticed and asked about it, she said, "This way makes more sense," and moved on to the next room as though that conversation had concluded. Daniel would watch these moments from across the room with a careful blankness that I later learned to read as deliberate non-intervention. He was not oblivious. He knew exactly what his mother was doing. He just had decided that the cost of addressing it was higher than the cost of letting me absorb it. I tried to address it once early on. I told Daniel that I needed Connie to call before she came over, that our home was our space, and that I was not comfortable with unannounced visits that felt like inspections. He listened to everything I said. He nodded in the way that looks like agreement. And then he called Connie, and what he actually said, and I know because I heard every word from the hallway, was, "Riley is a little stressed about the renovations. Just call first for now until she settles in," as though the issue was my stress level, as though I needed to settle into my own house. Connie called the next time, but she arrived with Gerald and Marcus and Diane, and the four of them walked the property like they were assessing it. Marcus talked about which trees should come down. Diane asked about the back bedroom and Wes. We had any plans for it. Gerald stood on the back porch for a long time looking at the land with an expression I could not then interpret but now understand completely. I made coffee for all of them, I smiled. I was polite because I am always polite, but something small and cold had started to grow in the back of my mind. It would be many months before I understood what that cold thing was. It was instinct. And instinct, as it turns out, is very rarely wrong. The renovation became a way for the family to make themselves essential to our home. Marcus had construction experience, and Daniel asked him to help with the porch. I agreed because the money saved was real and Marcus did good work. But Marcus started showing up on weekdays when Daniel was at work and I was home. He would let himself in through the back, which Daniel had given him a key to, a key Daniel had not mentioned giving. He would work, yes, but he would also look. He went through closets under the pretense of checking wall integrity. He spent a long time in the basement. He once came up from the basement with a box that I had not seen before, a box that did not belong to us, and he looked at me when he surfaced in a way that I can only describe as measuring me. I asked him what the box was. He said it was old tools. He put it in his truck. I never saw it again. I told Daniel. Daniel said Marcus must have left the tools here years ago, which made no sense because his family had never owned this property. When I pointed that out, Daniel said he must have left them for a friend who did. And then he changed the subject with the fluency of someone who had been changing subjects his whole life. I started writing things down, not because I suspected anything specific, but because I am a bookkeeper. It is how my brain works. I track things, I keep records, I create paper trails out of instinct. I bought a small notebook and I kept it in my work bag, and every time something felt off, I wrote it down with the date and the detail. This habit, which felt almost silly at the time, almost paranoid, turned out to be the most important thing I did in that entire season of my life. The renovations continued. The porch got fixed. New windows were ordered. The basement was cleaned out, at least the parts of it I could access, because I noticed around month 4 that there was a section of the basement behind an old wooden shelf unit that seemed to have a door frame outline in the wall that nobody had mentioned. I asked Daniel about it. He said it was an old root cellar sealed off decades ago. I wrote it down. Month 5 of living in that house brought a shift in Connie's energy that I felt before I could explain. She went from the neutral expression to something warmer on the surface but tighter underneath, like a smile stretched over a frame that was pulling in opposite directions. She started complimenting the house more. She called it beautiful. She called it special. She started telling stories about the town, about the history of properties in that area, about how land values were going up. She said this casually, conversationally, the way you would if you were just sharing interesting information. But she said it 3 times in 2 visits, and I wrote it down both times. It was in month 6 that the first real crack appeared in the surface of everything. I was doing our household financial reconciliation, something I did every month without fail, and I noticed a transfer I did not recognize. It was not large, $1,200. It had gone from our joint account to an account I did not have the details for. The memo line said property maintenance. I pulled up the previous 2 months. There had been 2 other transfers I had not noticed, 800 and 1500, both with vague memo lines, property tax adjustment. Survey fee. I sat with those numbers for a long time. Then I opened the file drawer where we kept the house documents and I looked at our mortgage paperwork again. I had signed it. I had initialed every page, but I had not read every page the way I was reading them now. I went through slowly, page by page, and on page 31 of the closing packet, I found something that made me stop breathing for a moment. There was an addendum. It was a 1-page document with dense legal language. My initials were on it. I did not remember initialing it. I did not remember anyone explaining it to me. What it said, once I worked through the language, was that a portion of the property, specifically the back parcel of just over a quarter acre, had been designated as a shared access easement with a named third party. The third party was a company. The company name was MG Property Holdings LLC. I did not know what MG Property Holdings LLC was, but I knew the initials, M and G, Marcus and Gerald. I closed the folder. I put everything back exactly as it had been. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a long time. I did not cry. I did not panic. I felt something much quieter than either of those things, something that sat in my chest like a stone and did not move. I felt the specific and terrible feeling of a truth arriving that you had been half expecting and fully dreading. I did not say anything to Daniel that night, not because I was afraid, because I needed to know more before I spoke. I had learned from watching my mother that when you speak from pain before you have facts, you lose 2 things at once. You lose the argument and you lose the warning you could have held. I was not going to lose both, so I waited and I planned. The first call I made was to my mother, not because I wanted comfort, though I needed it, but because my mother had a friend named Helen who had been a paralegal for over 20 years before she retired. I told my mother I had found some language in a property document I did not understand and asked if Helen would look at it. My mother did not ask questions the way another person might. She just said, "I will call her today." Helen agreed to meet me the following Tuesday while Daniel was at work. I brought the entire closing packet. Helen was small and quiet, and she wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She sat at my mother's kitchen table and read for 40 minutes without speaking. I drank 2 cups of tea and watched the clock. When she looked up, she took off her glasses and set them on the table. She said, "Riley, who was the closing attorney on this transaction?" I told her the attorney was named Brent Colville. Daniel had recommended him. He was a friend of Marcus, as it turned out. Helen nodded slowly. She said she wanted to be careful about how she said what she was going to say. She said the addendum I had found was real and binding. She said my initials on it meant that legally I had agreed to it regardless of whether I had been properly informed of its contents. She said that the easement gave MG Property Holdings LLC the right to access and use the back parcel for specific purposes that were written in language vague enough to be interpreted broadly. She said that in her experience, this type of addendum was not standard. She said that in her experience, this type of addendum was the kind of thing that appeared in documents when someone wanted to create a claim on a property without the other party fully understanding that a claim was being created. I asked her what that meant in plain terms. She said it meant that Marcus and Gerald, if they were indeed MG Property Holdings, had legal access to a portion of the property I believed I fully owned. She said that depending on how the LLC was structured and what their intentions were, this could become a significant issue if I and Daniel ever separated or if the property were ever sold. She said I needed a real estate attorney, not one connected to anyone in Daniel's family or network. A completely independent ones. I drove home from my mother's house and I sat in the driveway of that old house for 15 minutes. I looked at the October trees, now bare and gray in early spring, and I thought about the woman who had stood in that kitchen 6 months ago feeling like she was supposed to be there. I thought about what she had not known. I thought about what she knew now, and I made a decision that I kept quietly every day from that point forward. I was going to find everything, every piece, every document. Every transfer, every handshake that had happened without my knowledge. And when I had all of it, I would decide what to do, but not before. The independent attorney I found was named Patricia Osai. She came recommended through a community legal resource center. She had 17 years of experience in real estate and property law. She wore sharp blazers and spoke in short, direct sentences that left no room for softness when softness was not useful. She was exactly what I needed. I met with Patricia 3 times over the following 6 weeks. I brought the closing packet, my notebook of observations, the bank statements with the 3 unexplained transfers, and a timeline I had constructed of every unusual event since we moved in. Patricia was not dramatic about any of it. She read, she asked questions, she made notes. At the end of the third meeting, she leaned forward and told me what she had found. The easement was real. The transfers from our joint account had gone to a property management account tied to MG Property Holdings. The company was registered in the state with Marcus Greer and Gerald Greer listed as members. She had found no services rendered to justify any of the 3 transfers. She told me that the closing attorney, Brent Colville, had a professional relationship with Marcus that could constitute a conflict of interest, given that Marcus was a named beneficiary of an addendum in a closing he oversaw. She told me that what I had discovered was not a misunderstanding or an oversight. She said those words, Car. Fully, and then she stopped and looked at me until I understood that she was telling me something without saying all of it. I said it for her, I said someone planned this. She said she could not make that determination, but she said that the pattern was consistent with a deliberate structure. And she said that if Daniel had known about the addendum, which she believed he had, then I had a larger problem than a property dispute. I drove home from that meeting and I did something I had not done in months. I cried, not because I was weak, but because I had been holding the weight of what I suspected for so long without releasing it that I needed to put it down somewhere. I pulled into a parking lot and I let myself cry for 10 minutes. Then I fixed my face and I went home and I made dinner and I sat across from my husband at the table we had bought together for this house, and I looked at him and I watched him talk about his day and I thought, how long have you known, Daniel? How long have you been smiling at me while this was happening? I did not ask him, not yet. The notebook was filling up. I had documented 4 more unexplained bank withdrawals that I found by going back through 18 months of statements. They added up to a total of just over $9,000. I had photographed the addendum. I had a copy of the MG Property Holdings LLC registration. I had a record of every transfer with dates and amounts. I had Patricia's written assessment. I was building something, I just needed a few more pieces. The next piece came from a place I did not expect. Diane, Daniel's younger sister, called me on a Thursday evening in April. This was unusual. Diane and I were civil but not close. She was careful around me in a way that I had always read as shyness but was now reinterpreting. She asked if I wanted to get coffee that Saturday. She said she just wanted to catch up. I said yes, I was curious. We met at a small place near her apartment. She ordered a latte, I ordered black coffee. We talked about surface things for about 20 minutes and I could feel her working up to something. She kept glancing at her phone. She kept starting sentences and shifting them midway. Finally, she looked at me directly and she said, Riley, I need to tell you something and I need you to understand that I did not know the whole thing when it started. I just found out some of it recently and I could not tell you. I said, tell me. She said that about a year before Daniel and I started looking at houses, Connie had called a family meeting without her, just Connie, Gerald, Marcus, and Daniel. She found out about this meeting later because Marcus had mentioned it in passing once and then immediately seemed to wish he had not. She had never learned what was discussed. But she said that a few months after that meeting, Daniel started talking about the idea of buying property, and that Marcus had told her once, very casually, that the Greer family was going to make something work with some land. She said she did not think much of it at the time, but after we bought the house, she started noticing things. She noticed that Marcus had a key. She noticed that Connie spoke about the property in a way that was slightly too familiar, not like someone who visited her daughter-in-law's home, but like someone who had a stake in a family asset. She noticed that Gerald and Marcus had a new LLC because she had seen the paperwork on Gerald's desk once when she went to visit her parents. She said she was not trying to blow up my marriage. She said she loved her brother, but she said she also knew what was right and what was wrong, and she could not watch me be in the dark about this any longer. I asked her one question. I asked her if she believed Daniel had known about the addendum before we signed. She looked at her latte for a long moment. Then she said, Marcus told me Daniel was the one who brought Brent Colville into the deal. I nodded, I thanked her, I paid for both coffees. I drove home and I added every word of that conversation to my notebook. Now I had an outside witness, not a legal witness in the formal sense, but a family member who had seen pieces of the pattern from a different angle and whose account aligned exactly with what the documents showed. Diane had not signed anything and had nothing to lose by telling me the truth. Her account was credible. I called Patricia that evening. I told her about the conversation. She said that Diane's willingness to speak was significant. She said it moved us from circumstantial documentation to corroborated documentation. She asked me what I wanted to do with what I had. She laid out several options. I could confront Daniel directly. I could pursue a legal challenge to the easement based on undisclosed conflict of interest at closing. I could consult a family law attorney about what my exposure looked like in the event of a separation. Or I could do all three, but in a specific order that protect. Ted me best. I told her I needed one more piece before I moved. That piece was already sitting in our house, I just had not reached it yet. The sealed section of the basement had bothered me since month one. Daniel had said it was an old root cellar, but there was nothing root cellar shaped about the outline of that door frame, and the wooden shelf unit in front of it was bolted to the floor in a way that ordinary shelves are not. I had never pressed it because I had learned the cost of pressing things too directly in that house, but I was ready now. Daniel was away for 2 nights for a work conference in late April. Marcus was not coming by. Connie did not have her schedule for the week. I waited until the first night, and then I went down to the basement with a flashlight and a small pry bar I had bought 2 weeks earlier and told no one about. The shelf unit was bolted at 4 points. It took me just over an hour to work the bolts loose. The unit slid on the concrete with a scraping sound that was very loud in the quiet house. Behind it was exactly what I had suspected from the framing. A door, old wood, recently refinished. A new padlock hung on it that was clearly not original to the house. I did not have the key, but the wood around the hinges was old, and when I applied the pry bar carefully, the hinge plate pulled away from the frame without difficulty. The door swung inward. Inside was a small room, maybe 8 feet by 10, concrete floor, the smell of old wood and something metallic. A single bare bulb fixture with a chain, and when I pulled it the light worked, which meant the room was wired and had been accessed recently. There were 2 metal shelving units, on them were boxes, file boxes labeled in Gerald's handwriting, property surveys, boundary assessments, soil reports. They were all labeled with the address of our house. There was one more box, smaller, sitting on the bottom shelf. Inside it I found 3 things. The first was a copy of the original property deed from before our purchase, which showed that the property had been listed through a shell company before being brought to market. The shell company's registered agent was Brent Colville. The second was a printed email exchange between Marcus and Daniel from 8 months before we bought the house. In that exchange, Marcus outlined what he called the land play. He described the easement, he described the access rights, he described what it would allow the family to do with the back parcel, and Daniel's responses in that chain were not the responses of a man hearing this plan for the first time. He asked clarifying questions. He suggested modifications to the language. He wrote, "Make sure Riley's initials are on the addendum page, but don't walk her through it separately." The third item in the box was a handwritten note in Connie's handwriting on Connie's monogrammed stationery. It said, "Once it's done and she's signed, we hold the parcel until the value peaks. If things go sideways with them, we have the access. If they stay together, we fold it in when the time is right. Either way, the land stays in this family." I photographed everything, every single page, every email, the note, the boxes, the room, the door, the shelf unit. I rebolted the shelf as close to original as I could manage. I went upstairs, I made tea I did not drink. I sat at the kitchen table in the house I had chosen and paid for and signed my name to, and I understood finally and completely that I had not been building a home with my husband. I had been used to acquire an asset for his family. My name, my credit, my savings, my trust had all been instruments in a plan that was made before I ever walked through the front door. I was not going to cry this time, I was past that room entirely. I texted Patricia the next morning, I told her I had the emails, I told her I had the note, I told her I was ready. Patricia's response was swift and thorough. She told me that the email exchange in which Daniel explicitly instructed that I not be walked through the addendum was potentially actionable as fraudulent omission in a real estate transaction. She said the note from Connie, while not a legal contract, supported a pattern of intent. She said she was referring me to a family law colleague because the situation now had both real estate and marital legal dimensions. She said from this point forward, I needed to be very careful about what I said to Daniel and to anyone in his family. I said I understand. The family law attorney's name was Claire Mead. She was direct in the same way Patricia was direct, but her directness felt warmer, like someone who had sat with a lot of people in a lot of difficult moments and understood that information and compassion were not opposites. I met her for the first time on a Tuesday morning. I brought everything. The documents, the photos, the notebook, the email chain, the note, Diane's account in writing because I had asked Diane to write down what she told me, and she had done it without hesitation. Claire told me I had something real. She said what I had documented was a pattern of coordinated deception by multiple family members, including my spouse. She talked about my options. She explained concepts around marital assets and separate property and what the property dispute might look like alongside a divorce proceeding if that was the direction I chose to go. She was not pushing me toward any outcome. She was giving me information so that I could make a real decision rather than an emotional one. I asked her the practical question. I asked what I needed to do immediately to protect myself financially. She told me to open a separate account in my name only and move the equivalent of my direct payroll deposits there going forward. She told me not to make any large joint expenditures without documentation. She told me to compile all financial records for the past 3 years. She told me not to alter or remove anything from the house that could be considered marital property. She told me to keep my behavior completely normal with Daniel for the time being because any abrupt change might trigger him to act before I was ready. I walked out of Claire's office and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt clear. The fog of confusion and hurt and second guessing was gone. I knew what I was dealing with, I knew what I had, I knew what I was going to do, and I was calm. Deeply, quietly, completely calm. I went back to the house and I made dinner. Daniel came home from work. We ate together. He told me about a deal he was working on. I asked questions. I laughed once or twice at the right moments. I passed the salad. I cleared the plates. I was the same Riley I had always been on the outside, but the Riley on the inside was done, and there is something almost peaceful about being done. It took 6 more weeks to have everything in order. I will not bore you with every legal detail, but I will tell you the key things I did in that time. I opened my own account, I redirected my direct deposit, I compiled 3 years of joint financial records with Patricia's help and Claire's guidance, I documented the $9,000 in unauthorized transfers. Patricia filed a formal challenge to the closing based on undisclosed conflict of interest through Brent Colville. This filing was not served on Daniel directly, not yet, but it was on the record. I also quietly had an independent property appraisal done on the full parcel, including the back portion covered by the easement, so that I had a current market value on paper. I also did one thing that I want to describe carefully because it matters. I told Diane what I was doing, not the legal specifics, but the direction of it. I told her that I was protecting myself and that I wanted her to know that I was not holding her family's actions against her personally. She had told me the truth when she did not have to, that mattered. She told me she would not say anything to Marcus or Connie. She kept her word. The moment I chose to speak to Daniel was a Saturday morning in June, not because June was special, because by that Saturday morning everything was in place and there was nothing left to wait for. He was at the kitchen table with coffee and his phone when I came downstairs. The June light was coming through the windows we had replaced together in January, and the house looked genuinely beautiful in that light. I want you to know that even then, even at that moment, I could see the beauty in what we had built. It just was not mine the way I had believed it was. I sat down across from him. I did not have a folder of documents in my hands. I did not need them. They were all on file, all with Patricia, all with Claire, all organized and time-stamped and ready. I just needed to speak. I said, Daniel, I found the basement room. I found the box. I read the emails. I read your mother's note. He went very still, the kind of still that happens when a person's entire internal system shifts gears at once. He did not immediately deny, he just went still. I said I have had 2 attorneys working with me for the past 2 months. I have everything documented. The addendum, the transfers, the LLC, Brent Colville's conflict of interest, and your email to Marcus specifically telling him not to walk me through the addendum page. He said, Riley. I said I am not asking for an explanation. I have all the explanation I need. I am telling you what is coming so that you can speak to your own attorney before you receive anything officially. He said my name again. There was something in his voice that wanted to be an apology and was not quite getting there, something that was still calculating even as it was performing remorse. I said I also want you to know that Diane told me about the family meeting before we bought the house. And I want you to know that she did the right thing by telling me, and I will not allow anything T comes from this to fall on her. That landed differently than the legal information. Something changed in his face when I said Diane's name, something that looked more like shame than the legal stillness had, because the legal information was about strategy and Diane telling me was about something human. I stood up, I said, I think we both know what this means for our marriage. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I want the process to be clean and I want what is mine returned to me. If that happens cleanly and cooperatively, I am prepared to be civil about all of this. If it does not, the attorneys will handle it, including the conflict of interest challenge on the closing. He said, you have been planning this. I said, you planned this first. And then I took my coffee and I went to the back porch and I looked at that acre of land, my land, the land someone had tried to carve a piece out of without my knowledge, and I breathed the June air and I felt, for the first time in what felt like forever, completely like myself. The fallout was not quiet. I want to be honest about that. There is no version of this story where the ending is fast and clean and nobody makes a scene. Connie made a scene. She called me within 2 hours of my conversation with Daniel. She was not kind. She used words designed to make me feel small and unstable and unreasonable. She said I was destroying her family. She said I had never belonged with them. She said the house was always going to be more than just something for me and Daniel, and I should have known that from the start. That last part was interesting. She said it with the certainty of someone who believed she was right. She genuinely believed that what they had done was not a betrayal because in her mind the family's interests in Daniel's marriage were 2 separate compartments and she had simply been looking after the first one. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The depth of that compartmentalization, the ease of it, the confidence of it. I did not argue with her, I let her speak until she was done. And then I said, Connie, everything from this point forward goes through my attorney. Please have your son or your own attorney reach out to Patricia Osei. I will not be receiving any more personal calls about this matter, and I hung up. Gerald called Daniel repeatedly, but not me. Marcus texted Daniel. The family circled around each other. I was on the outside of that circle now, and I can tell you that being on the outside of it felt like relief. Diane texted me twice. The first time she said, I am so sorry for my part in your pain. The second time she said, you're stronger than any of us understood. I saved both of those. The legal process took 7 months. I will not detail every step because honestly it is more exhausting to recite than to live through. What I will tell you is the result. The closing conflict of interest challenge was taken seriously. Brent Colville settled outside of court and the settlement included the formal dissolution of the easement. MG Property Holdings LLC's access claim on the back parcel was removed from the deed. I got clear title to the full property. The $9,000 in unauthorized transfers was returned to me through the marital asset settlement. I retained the house and Daniel was bought out of his share at a fair market value that the independent appraisal supported. He got his portion. I got the property. I got the land. I got the home I had chosen. I also got my names, clean and whole and only mine on the deed this time. The day Patricia sent me the final documents, I was sitting in the kitchen of that old house. The late afternoon light was different by then, November again. The trees bare the way they had been when we first moved in, but everything else was different. The kitchen was finished, the floors were refinished, the windows were new and the drafts were gone, the porch was solid. The house was genuinely beautiful now and it was mine. I made tea this time. Real tea with the good mug my grandmother had given me, the blue one with the small crack on the handle that I refused to throw away because she had touched it. And I sat at the table and I read every page of those final documents slowly and carefully, the way I should have read everything from the beginning. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "It is done, Mom." She did not ask what exactly was done. She already knew. She just said, "Good." And then she said, "Riley, you did not fall apart. You have no idea how proud of you I am." I thought about what my grandmother had said to me on my wedding day. Make sure he sees you, not the idea of you. Make sure he sees you. He had not seen me. He had seen an opportunity and dressed it up in love and let me believe in it for years. But here is the thing, I had seen myself. I had seen myself clearly enough to know what I deserved and clearly enough to build something real even when the people I trusted were building something else. The house is mine now, just mine, and I have done things to it that I never could have while someone else had an unspoken claim on my choices. I knocked out a wall in the back bedroom. I made it into a room with light on 3 sides. I painted it a color called morning clay that changes in the different hours of the day, pale and warm in the morning and something deeper and warmer in the afternoon. I put a desk in it. It is the room where I work now when I work from home. It is the best room in the house. The basement room behind the shelf unit I cleared out completely. I had the bolts removed and the hinges replaced properly and the door frame squared. Then I had it drywalled over. There is no trace of it now. The shelf is gone too, replaced with open wooden shelving I built myself on a long Saturday with music and coffee and the particular satisfaction of making something with your own hands that belongs entirely to you. Connie has not called since the day I told her everything would go through the attorneys. Gerald has not reached out. Marcus has not reached out. I do not know what Daniel has told them and I do not want to know. That is a chapter that is finished and I do not go back into finished chapters. Daniel and I have not spoken since the day the final documents were signed. There was nothing left to say by then. We were civil through the attorneys. The civility was thin in places, but it held. It was enough. The people who have stayed in my life are the people who were always really there. My mother, who calls every Sunday. My grandmother, who is 81 and still sharp enough to know when something has been won without being told the details. A handful of friends who were not tied to Daniel's world and who showed up for me during those 7 months with the particular grace of people who do not need to understand everything to know you need them near. And Diane, who I have had coffee with 4 times since everything ended. She is not responsible for what her family did. She chose truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I will not forget that. I think about what I would tell my younger self, the one who walked into that October kitchen and felt like she was supposed to be there. I would not tell her not to love him. I would not tell her to be suspicious or hard. I would tell her to keep reading every page of every document. I would tell her that trust and attention are not opposites. I would tell her that her instincts were right from the first moment something felt off, and that she should have trusted them sooner, but that it is not her fault she did not because she had been taught her whole life to smooth things over and call it kindness. And I would tell her this, and I want you to hear this too. The house was always yours, even when someone was trying to take a piece of it, even when the walls were holding secrets that were not yours to carry, even when the basement was locked and the shelf was bolted and the papers had been signed without your full understanding. The house was always yours because you chose it and you paid for it and you loved it and you stayed. And what belongs to you cannot be taken without a fight. I just made sure to bring the right documents to the fight. Riley did not explode. She did not beg, she did not fall apart in front of the people who had tried to quietly dismantle her life. She read every page, she built a case. She waited for the right moment and then she walked calmly into that kitchen and she told the truth to the people who had been hiding it from her for years. And the walls of that old house finally stopped whispering because there were no more secrets left inside them. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. Tell me the moment that broke you open the most. Tell me what you would have done with those basement documents. Tell me if you have ever trusted someone the way Riley trusted Daniel and found out the walls already knew what you did not. This channel is built for you. For the ones who stayed too long and gave too much and finally stopped waiting to be seen and started acting on what they already knew.